Hi everyone, Professor King here. I feel like this is like an extreme close-up of my face, but I think I'm always this close to the screen, which is kind of terrifying. Anyway, in this video, I'm going to be talking about essentially the third section that we're reading of Native Country of the Heart by Cherry Moraga. And I'm really going to be talking about it in terms of preparing for the annotated bibliography and the final essay. I know that a lot of us have never written one of those before, an annotated bibliography, and so it's a little unusual maybe or strange, but I want to walk you through this, particularly with the book that we're reading in mind, so that you have a clear understanding of essentially how to approach this thing. So I'll take it to a share screen in a moment, but always remember that if questions arise, please feel free to email me, hit me up on Canvas messaging, or visit my Zoom office hours. Or if you're watching this in the future, maybe I'll have in-person office hours, who knows? With any questions you have, I'm happy to help. All right, without further ado, I'm going to take it to the share screen, and hopefully we can do that and the thing. We can do the thing and the thing. All right. So how do I prepare essays 4 and 5 with Native Country of the Heart in mind? Well, first and foremost, you have to read the memoir, right? You have to read the book in its entirety. You can't really engage with a text if you don't know specifically in detail what it's saying. You know, a SparkNotes summary or something like that is not gonna do the trick for an annotated bibliography and an essay like this, particularly of this length, and one that requires you to use examples from the text and to apply items you understand, et cetera, et cetera. So read it, highlight it, and annotate it as you go. As you can see here, as I've gotten older, I've gotten much more chaste, I'll say, in my annotations. I just put little like asterisks next to areas that I want to revisit. But if you're a big highlighter and annotator, maybe you use this isn't those, but maybe you use those colorful Post-it note markers, whatever it is. Go nuts, right? The more annotations you have, the better it's going to help in preparing for your essay. We know that by now, so I don't need to belabor that point. But look, don't just highlight and annotate. Go back and look over what you've been drawn to. And a lot of times what you'll find is there are patterns. Either patterns that you are applying some understanding of something from the text to your life. Maybe something from the text is reminding you of something. Maybe you want to learn more about some item from the text that you're uncovering, whatever the case may be. But look over your patterns, right? The things that draw your attention in when you're reading a text. And that will help to facilitate not only the brainstorm, but the research and then the argument for these assignments. And speaking of brainstorming, I'll give you an example. So typically when I tell students to brainstorm, I usually tell people to take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. Try to make it as long as you can, but if you can only squeeze out 5 to 10, and you got to set a timer or whatever to make sure you're fulfilling that 5 to 10 minute interval, that's totally fine. But if you can do it longer, if you kind of get lost in the brainstorm with all the ideas coming to mind, keep going. Don't limit yourself in the brainstorm, in other words. Also, don't limit yourself in terms of worrying about things like spelling or clarity when you're at the brainstorming stage, because brainstorming is just to get ideas on the page. Doesn't have to be beautiful, doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be your initial logical, emotional, psychological, visceral reaction to the text. And so write down every single possible thing that comes in your head. Now I'm going to do a little mini one right here, because I don't want to make you watch me do a brainstorm for 10 minutes, but I want to give you some ideas of what a brainstorm looks like. And I'm going to verbally talk through the video while I'm writing items down so that you can kind of get an insight into what's going on in my brain. You don't have to talk when you're doing yours unless you want to. Sometimes people talking it out is easier. You can even do a dictation brainstorm if that helps you. Sometimes that helps me, just putting that dictation microphone on your phone and recording what you have to say. But anyway, here goes. So let's brainstorm. Okay, so what are some things that I'm thinking about when I look at this section of Native Country of the Heart? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is actually my own family background. I know you can't tell it from looking at me because clearly I'm a white person, but I was raised in a multi-ethnic household. My mother remarried when I was 5. My stepfamily is from Mexico. And so I was enculturated into a lot of customs and traditions and beliefs from my stepfather's side of the family. And so when she talks about like Elvira, Elvira reminds me a lot of my Nana Concha, who was my step grandmother on my stepfather's side. So, you know, I think about that and I think about all the memories associated with her, right? And sort of thinking about you know, maybe womanhood, right? Particularly Latino womanhood and kind of what that means, Mexican womanhood more specifically, for a woman like Elvira, who is roughly pretty close in age to my Nana Concha. So I've got that, right? I think about Cherry Moraga herself, right? And you know, her sexuality, right? Because that's something that interests me in terms of gender studies and sexuality studies, kind of how she got there, right? The issue with her sister-in-law, I always think is really fascinating. Also, right, like Orange County is mentioned in this, and we're at a school that's in Orange County, and a lot of us grew up in some of these areas that Cherry Moraga mentions, right? Like Yorba Linda, she talks about Huntington Beach in an earlier chapter where they have that hotel on Main Street that they're staying in. So kind of thinking about, well, you know, what role does Orange County play in this? And why is that important? Okay. Always, right? That's the question we always have to ask. Why is that? Not I'm a horrible typist, by the way, if you can't tell already. You know, and then other items, right? Like when she talks about the mission system, right? And sort of the inherent racism and the genocide that goes on there. When she talks about Catholicism, and the role that plays not only in her mother's life, but in her own life, right? Then she talks about like mysticism and ghosts and, you know, whatever. So just again, I'm not going to go too much more into just boring you with what a brainstorm should look like, but I've highlighted it and I kind of talked my rationale through it. Again, you don't have to talk your rationale through it because it may slow you down when you're writing, unless you're dictating. But kind of getting these ideas on the page. And then once you have the brainstorm, set it down, take a moment, maybe, you know, go walk your dog or eat a snack or whatever, and then come back and look at it and see if there's anywhere where you can add to it, right? Like maybe when she talks about Gloria Anzaldúa, right? Oops, wrong. There we go. We can talk about, I'm a theory person, Gloria Anzaldúa is a theorist. You know, maybe I want to talk a little bit about that. Maybe I want to talk about it in terms of Orange County, right? And kind of what we're seeing there. Maybe I want to talk about it in terms of motherhood, right? Because Elvira is a mother and this is all about motherhood. And, you know, maybe I'm relating it back to other readings we had in the class, like about the Bath riots or Roma or something like that, right? So like, again, just seeing where your brain goes, giving it a rest, and then coming back and trying to get as many more ideas on the page once you have that kind of space of timeout and reflection. So that's number 2, perform the brainstorm, right? Oops, and I forgot to highlight the very first one. Okay. Then, when you have some ideas, not only do you have ideas here, but you have keywords. That's going to help you with your research for the annotated bibliography. And a great place to start for the annotated bibliography is the selected bibliography that is in the book itself. And that's on page 239 of this edition of the text. Again, this bibliography here, it lists texts that help to contextualize what Moraga is talking about, that served as inspirations for her own genesis as a writer, as a thinker, as a theorist, etc. And just things that'll put this book into context that you may go, oh, I want to find out more about that book. I'm going to look it up here and I'm going to delve into it, because that's really why we have bibliographies and works cited. At this age, people think that we have them so that, our professor makes sure we're not cheating and that we know how to cite. Yes, that's true. But as we go higher and higher into our academic progress, into our educations, the real reason we have these bibliographies, like the one at the back of the book, is so that when we're performing research, we have rabbit holes to go down. We have avenues to walk down to learn more about the types of ideas that the author is sharing with us. So make sure you review that. And if any of those texts stick out to you, guess what? You can look them up. You can get a little probably abstract or summary blurb about them, and you can see if they'll fit into the kind of research you want to do for your essay on this topic. Next, number 4, think about your approach. And I love this section that we're reading this week because it provides a variety of approaches. And you're not limited to these, but these are just some that came up in this section that we can talk about. So first off, I don't know, there's some sort of vibrating thing going on. So first off, she has this really cool discussion of the California mission system and sort of the history of the Tongva people and other indigenous groups to California, and how the mission system kind of served to perform a genocide, but at the same time is, a cornerstone of her own ethnic heritage. Not only, she talks about the Moragas and how that, that part of the family is like the colonizers, right? But then she talks about how her mom calls herself una India, right? And how her indigenous heritage is just as much part of her, of her ethnic tapestry, of her background, right? And so thinking about that, we always, again, have to ask ourselves, why is she talking about this in this chapter? What larger ideas from this memoir is it touching upon? And we can perform a historical analysis of that. If you like doing historical research and finding out about history, that's a great place to start for history. Also the theme of loss, right? Clearly, I'm not giving any spoilers away, but clearly we know this is written by a woman who is aging herself about her mother. And the closer we get to the end, where we're in, expressions, the convalescent home that her mother's in, we can start to understand that this is in one way about loss, and not just the loss of a physical human presence in our life, but the loss of the mind, right? Vis-a-vis her mother's Alzheimer's, the loss of family in other ways, like the sort of fracture in her relationship with her brother, the loss of the parents' marriage as the mother starts to sort of extricate herself from the father, et cetera, et cetera. So the theme of loss may be something you want to talk about in your essay, and what you have to say about that. Another one, and that's why I put this like weird photo right here. Think about the liminal space that's occupied not only by Cherry herself, but by Mexican people, by Mestizo people, by women, right? By any number of people. And when I say liminal space, this harkens back to our unit on post-colonial theory. And the best way I can describe liminal space is it's like being in a doorway between two rooms. You're not fully in one room and you're not fully in the other, right? So you don't really belong to either room. You're in the doorway, but you also kind of belong to both because you're in the doorway. And so people who come from biracial identities, people who exist in a state of passing, right? Whether that be passing according to gender, according to race, according to sexual orientation, according to socioeconomic status, they exist in these liminal spaces where they don't fully fit in one world, they don't fully fit in the other, right? A lot of people in the immigrant experience talk about liminal spaces. And so another item to touch on is sort of understanding that liminal space that's discussed throughout this novel, this memoir, in a variety of ways. Gender issues, right? Thinking, the first thing that came to my mind is this difference between Cherry and James. And the way that James is allowed to navigate the world as a man, right? As a man of biracial identity, as a man who can pass as white, as a man who is married to a conservative white woman, right? The way that he can navigate the world as different from the ways in which his sister, who identifies as queer, who identifies as Chicana, Latinx, right? How she navigates the world, and how the world, particularly their parents, but any number of people in the world, treat them differently as a result. Kind of building on the theme of loss, thinking of end of life experience. I think this is fascinating, particularly for someone like me, and this is not something I necessarily would have maybe cared about 20 years ago when I was, around the age of a lot of people in this class. But thinking, now that I'm getting older and kind of seeing my own friends and family members pass away around me, thinking about end of life experience and the gravitas and the change and the very sort of sobering realities associated with that. Also factoring in Orange County, Huntington Beach, as I mentioned, is brought up in this book. Yorba Linda is mentioned. Places pretty close to where a lot of us live. And I know in a previous broadcast, I mentioned Gustavo Arellano's book, Orange County. There are a number of great books on the history of Orange County, particularly from the Mexican-American experience. I also brought up An American Genocide, which talks about, if you want to do that sort of historical understanding of the California missions, talks about some of that. So, thinking about, well, what role is Orange County playing? There was a great movie that came out a few years ago, and it's called LA Plays Itself. And it's just this beautiful sort of pastiche documentary about these areas in Los Angeles and Long Beach, my little town, where we get to see how cityscapes change, how cultures change in film, right? And why that's relevant or important. So, to do something like that with this book might be fascinating to you, or really anything else that spoke to you. If there's something, there are a million other things from the book that I didn't mention here that you can talk about that may be speaking to you. If you're coming from a totally different walk of life than the kind of stuff that my brain picks up on, that's totally fine. Again, this is not a math class where there's one right answer. It's what you notice most, the patterns that you're making, what speaks to you, the kind of research that you want to perform. Really let that authentic interest of your own fuel this research and eventually the argument that you'll have for the final essay. And then again, come up with keywords. I'm at number 5 now. Come up with keywords based on what you've read, what it makes you think of, right? Again, this brainstorm in highlighted yellow here might be helpful to consider some keywords, but don't stop there. That's what a lot of people do. They think up one word for research and they put that keyword into EBSCOhost and they're like, oh, didn't find anything. You got to tinker with it, right? You have to think of synonyms of that word, of close approximations, right? Maybe it's not Orange County, maybe it's Huntington Beach. Maybe it's not Mexican, it's Chicana, right? Think about those synonyms, those close approximations, because that will help to expand, to widen the net, we'll say, of the kind of research you can gather for yourself. And I know I talk about this in greater depth in previous videos. So again, I'm not going to really belabor the point here, but use those keywords, use synonyms and approximate terms, and start to gather your research. And one thing you can do, and I've mentioned this before, is to gather, when you're gathering research, you go to the library website, you go on EBSCOhost, you look up sources, they pass the CRAP test. You see that the source probably looks like it's something usable for the essay, but maybe it's 20 pages and you're thinking, well, okay, it's Wednesday night. I don't have, I got to get this other piece of homework done or whatever. I've got work I got to go to. Maybe I don't have time right now to read 20 pages. Well, what you can do is you can, oops, I didn't mean to do that. What you can do when you're in those search engines, not Google, by the way, but in those academic search engines, like Academic Search Complete from the library website, go into them, click on the source itself, and you should see on the first page, when you click on the title of the source, you should see a section that says abstract. And the abstract is a brief summary of what the article, the periodical, the chapter, what have you, what it'll be about. So instead of going through and reading all those 20 pages that you don't have time for on a Wednesday night when you're slammed, you have a 200 to 500 word abstract that should give you a pretty good understanding of what that article is about. So then that way you can go yay or nay. If it's nay, throw it out, look for some more. If it's yay, just save it, put it on the side, read it when you got time. If you read it and it doesn't work out, that's the nature of research. It's always leading you down these paths. Some might be dead ends, some might be paths that lead to other paths. It's just the nature of research. And then finally, begin building your annotated bibliography in which you showcase the research you're performing in preparation for Essay 5. And I can't stress this enough. The annotated bibliography is you telling me, look, I found these cool sources. In this case, it's going to be 4, right? I found these cool sources and here they are. You list them just like you would a works cited page, except in between each entry, that's alphabetized, hanging indent, 1-inch margins, Times New Roman, 12-point font. In between each one of those MLA formatted entries, you summarize the source and then you analyze it according to how it will fit into your essay. Maybe that's putting it in dialogue with another piece of research. Maybe that's applying its ideas to this book itself. I mean, clearly you need to be doing that because that's what the final essay is on. Maybe it is talking about why it presents a counter argument or why it might be kind of a dud, right? But that's what your annotated bibliography is. It's showing that you're gathering a body of research and you are then taking that body of research and you are informing the argument that you're developing for the final essay. So a couple of questions. Are the sources in my annotated bibliography the same as the ones that are in my final essay? If your research works out, that is the plan, right? That's how it should be. Now, there are random cases where I've had students submit an annotated bibliography and then at the last minute, after they did all this research, said, you know what, I'm not going to write an essay on this. I'm going to pivot to something totally different. It happens. Doesn't happen often, but it happens. In that case, their research would be different, right? But for 95% of the time, the research you're performing for the annotated bibliography contains the sources that you will use in your final essay. It's just your way of telling me, here's the research I'm doing, here's what it says, here's how I'm going to use it in the essay. That's what it is. And then in the final essay, that's exactly what you do. You have your introduction with your thesis statement. You have your body paragraphs that are led by a claim, supported by the evidence that you pull from these sources and from the primary text, and then analyze thoroughly. So that's when I say the annotated bibliography and the final essay are meant to work in conjunction with each other. I mean just that. Now your next question might be, well, I need 5 to 7 outside sources for my final essay. Yeah, which means after the annotated bibliography is 4, you only need to find 1 to 3 more. You might find more, don't find fewer, because that's going to hurt your overall final essay grade. But yeah, that, in other words, you've already done a lot of the work. It's just now using that work to support the argument you're making in the final essay. I'm going to take it off share screen, but I hope that, oh, God, extreme close up, King. I hope that helps in terms of just clarifying some of this and showing that all of this, again, is an incremental process. In this week's discussion boards, we're going to brainstorm and we're going to look for sources. Ideally, those are going to help to prepare you then for the annotated bibliography, the research you perform in the annotated bibliography that you summarize and you tell me how you're going to use in your essay, you're then going to apply and use in your final research essay that's argument driven, that's thesis driven, that's, analyzed and supported, and all the things that we've been doing since day one. So I hope that helps. Again, if any questions come up, please feel free to contact me. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great rest of your evening, week, lifetime, whatever. Bye.